I gotta check my notes here. You get a.
See, even you don't know. That's how complicated this combo is.
What's cracking, everyone? Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Rogue Refinery, the show where innovation and creativity reign supreme as we build around some of the coolest cards in Standard. I'm Alias, joined as always by Paul Cheon, and today we're going to see just how the boys from the Faithless Brewing podcast did with our task of building around Fiend Artisan. We heard your feedback regarding the format of the show, so we are back to 3 formats in 1 episode, and it is a slightly shorter one this week due to the holidays. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Paul, Fiend Artisan, what are you expecting from these guys today?
Yeah, so we actually got to choose the card for the brewery guys this week, and the card that we chose was Fiend Artisan, and the reason being, Fiend Artisan there's so many different ways to build around this card. You look at this and you go, can I build a deck to make Fiend Artisan as big as possible? How important is the search effect? Can I do a creature kill combo in the older formats? I mean, it screams to me like the type of card where you can go so many different directions, which is why I think, ultimately we went for this card for them to try to build around.
Yeah, and I think it's also a card that it's not seen in too many different archetypes at the moment. So, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's try this, let's try that, let's try the next thing. And it's not just all, okay, I'm just going to ram it into this thing and see if it works in a format or in an archetype that's already been established and is already making waves in the meta. So yeah, I'm excited to see what they come up with for sure.
And without further ado, let's hop straight into Standard with Dan Schriever. What deck did you choose to play in Standard, and how did you do with that deck?
Hey, Paul and Lily. Yeah, so for Fiend Artisan, the first thing I like to do when I start off with a new card is first do a little bit of research, and to the extent that this card has seen a little bit of play in Standard, it has so far been in Sacrifice decks. So think of Rakdos Sacrifice or Orzhov Sacrifice. So that's where I started my explorations. I think I arrived at a deck that is actually a pretty nice upgrade on some of the previous takes on that strategy. I took this into a couple of the Arena traditional Standard events. I think I got to 4 wins twice, so nice. 8-4 overall. Should have been 9-3, but 8-4 overall.
Very nice. So the first time I looked at this list, I was having a look at the cards, and I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. It looks like a pretty stock standard Sacrifice deck. And then I have a look at the companion, I'm like, oh, wait, it's Zirda. And, Zirda's clause says everything has to have an activated ability. And then I had to kind of do a double take, because then I looked at all the permanents. I'm like, oh, wait, these do all have activated abilities. So why Zirda over Obosh or Lurrus?
So Lurrus and Obosh are the companions you typically see in a Sacrifice strategy. With Zirda's companion ability, I get to get a 2-mana discount every time I activate Fiend Artisan, which means that if I want to tutor up another creature, like, say, a second Fiend Artisan, that's only going to cost me a single black mana. So that can actually lead to some really great turns. Like, if it's turn 4, I have my Flay Zirda, I have a mana left over, that's enough to summon another Fiend Artisan directly out of the deck, or activate one of the activated abilities on my creatures. So a cool sort of almost Fiend Artisan Zirda synergy-based deck, because it turns out, like you're saying, so many of these creatures that you can find in the Black-Red strategy have really nice activated abilities that benefit from Zirda's discount.
So speaking about those activated abilities, you have a couple of additional 1-drops. You have a ton of 1-drops in your deck. And the 2 that I want to talk about are Whisper Squad and Knight of the Ebon Legion. Talk about how impactful those cards were, especially with that combination with Zirda.
Yeah, so Whisper Squad is one that you will find in kind of the stock Sacrifice decks, because it's just a great way to get a lot of bodies in play, and they're not tokens, they're real creatures. So when they fill up the graveyard, the Fiend Artisan will see them, and this is a good way to just sort of get a lot of stuff in play. 2 mana per activation, that's okay, but what if it only costs 1 mana per activation? Now all of a sudden, you just have a couple spare mana open. The next thing you know, you can go from like 0 to hero. You have the whole squad is there in the span of just a few mana. So Zirda is great for Whisper Squad, and that also gives Fiend Artisan plenty of fodder to play with. But the really exciting one is the second creature you mentioned, Knight of the Ebon Legion. Every black mana you spend could pump the Knights by +3/+3. When I realized that that interaction table within a shell that is pretty close to what I already wanted to be playing, I got pretty excited, and let me tell you, I made some pretty huge Knight of the Ebon Legions in this deck.
For the low price of just 1 mana, you can have a 3/3 with Death Touch. Why not? Who doesn't want that?
Is that a good rate? Do you think Play Design would approve of that rate? 1 black, +3/+3 on a creature? Well, I mean, if you have to go through some hoops, maybe.
Let me paint a picture for you. So I have a Knight of the Ebon Legion. I've cast my companion. I have nothing else in play. They're at 18 life. What am I going to do? Well, what if I just attack, pump it a bunch of times, I deal 18 damage with just those 2 cards? I did that. And so it's really amazing how quickly the damage adds up with this combination of cards.
So for the same price, you can just make it +9/+9 if Zirda wasn't on the battlefield.
Exactly.
That seems good. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's how you know like the interaction between two cards is just completely over the top, right? When you have so many different options in terms of all the cards you have in your hand, you're like, you know what? The best thing to do is just tap all my mana and just pump my one creature that's on the battlefield.
You know what's even better when you have this massive death touch creature? Trample and maybe double strike. And what's better to do that than Embercleave? I see you're rocking this. This is something that Lurrus doesn't get to play, Obosh doesn't get to play. So how big of an impact did Embercleave make in this list?
Yeah, absolutely. This was like the last piece of the puzzle. I didn't initially think that Embercleave was going to be that important, but what I realized was that, man, it was actually pretty easy to get a huge Fiend Artisan or pretty easy to get a giant Knight of the Ebon Legion. They can just get chump blocked. That's a little bit disappointing, but I mean, hey, I've already got all the creatures in play. I'm not restricted on my casting costs. It doesn't matter if it's an even costed 6 mana card. Zirda will accept any equipment. So yeah, I had some amazing kills with Embercleave, able to steal some games, some really impressive just smashing. It's one of the best feelings when you watch the creature just go in and then it's like, now it's this Bane. Now it's the regular combat damage. There goes another chunk of damage and next thing you know, there's the victory sign.
Believe in the cleave. That sounds awesome.
So, you chose to kind of go with this deck because, of course, we tried to give you the task of building around this powerful card in Fiend Artisan. Now, ultimately, I mean, you had a pretty good record. How do you think this compares to, decks that are very similar in this vein, the other sacrifice strategies that do happen to play cards like the Lurrus?
So main draw for this strategy for me is that you don't have to play any bad cards, and that actually the cards that you are sort of adding to synergize with like Zirda are already good cards. So Knight of the Ebon Legion and Embercleave, I mean, these are proven cards in Standard. So you're actually getting a dimension that I think is somewhat missing from the sacrifice strategies that we've seen so far. I mean, this is a deck that is capable of going tall, if I can use that expression, right? Making a single big creature and just smashing through.
Oh, yeah.
I was getting Fiend Artisans, they would come down as 4/4, 5/5, and then they just keep growing. They get as big as 7/7, 10/10. It doesn't even, it's not cooperating because I have Sacrifice Outlaws myself. So I have Priest of Forgotten Gods, I have Witches Elven, I have Woe Strider. I can grow the Fiend Artisan as big as I need to. So I was actually pretty happy with just how all the pieces function together. I think this is a strategy that, you get to use all the modes of Fiend Artisan, primarily as a combat creature, but you get some really nifty, efficient turns with the activated abilities from Zirda that I think is definitely worth exploring more.
Alrighty, Dan. Well, job well done. Thank you very much. Paul, what do you think? I mean, this seems like a pretty solid way to, tangle with the best of the Rakdos sacrifice lists out there.
Having this deck built around Zirda instead of Lurrus, that's a pretty bold move, right? Because, if you just think about kind of the dominance of Lurrus in basically all formats, to kind of move away from that and try something else and have it be successful, that's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. I look forward to playing this one. So make sure you go and click the linky down below, friends, because you'll want to play this one too. I guarantee it. We're going to shift gears now to Pioneer. Welcome, David. Tell us about your Bant Umori Fiend Vanifar list. How did you do with this?
Thanks for having me. I went 3-2 in 2 different leagues. Basically, the deck is really sweet. You can play a bunch of cool value chain lines we'll go through. The one weakness it has is 2 Gyruda decks, our very own Cedric Phillips, I think top 2'd PTQ. So check out the Advantage Bar, our sister show. But he must have inspired lots of other players because every time I played every time they revealed it to me, you're pretty cold to that card.
All right, so you know what? I mean, like you said, this deck looks really sweet. And the first thing that I have to ask you is, kind of about your companion. Why Umori, and why was Umori so effective in this deck?
Well, first of all, I wanted to have a companion, and we kind of already knew about the Lurrus Abzan deck, and the metagame has already sort of adjusted. There are Rest in Pieces, there are Cry of Carnariums all over the place. So Umori is an idea that I extrapolated from Will Urker. He's a wonderful deck designer online. People should check out his stream or his Twitter. You're already wanting to play a bunch of different creatures because you are playing Fiend Artisan, and Umori kind of pays you off for that. It gives you an extra creature all the time. It's extra food if you need something to turn on your Fiend Artisan. And because you're playing a bunch of creatures, it's adding a lot of mana in a given turn. If you're casting 2 creatures, it basically is a free 4/5 that's adding 2 or 3 mana a turn, and you just get that free card. I mean, that's really important. The companion mechanic is super powerful. I don't think I'm breaking any new ground with that. And so
wait, what? Breaking news.
This one is a little underrated. The deck building costs are very steep, but because you want to play a lot of these, one of tutor targets, then the payoff with Umori, it changed the equation quite a bit.
Now, speaking of tutoring, I see you've got 4 copies of Prime Speaker Vanifar in here. So tell us a little bit more about this card and why it's so important.
Yeah, so I love Prime Speaker Vanifar. I think it got kind of a bad rap in early Pioneer because it was just cat comboing all the time, and that wasn't fun. So this list does not have an infinite combo built into it. It just does have a bunch of like sweet value chains that you can do. And Fiend Artisan works really well. It can find your Prime Speaker Vanifar if you don't draw it, because you only get to play 4, or it can kind of tune up the missing piece that your Vanifar doesn't have, including tutoring up pieces to continue the chain. So if you need to like find a corridor monitor and you don't have a 1-drop in play to sack with your Prime Speaker, you can just find it with your Fiend Artisan. And Prime Speaker is just like a huge threat, and it's resistant to a lot of the removal that's commonly being played. So Shock doesn't kill it, Abrupt Decay does not kill it. And if you kind of get this card uncontested for a turn, you can set up a board state that's very difficult, especially for these Lurrus decks to compete with.
Could you just kind of explain to us? All right, so let's say I have my draw. I got all my mana creatures in play. I got my Prime Speaker Vanifar, and I have a bunch of mana, and I get to untap. What does this chain look like? Because oftentimes when you do see a Prime Speaker Vanifar deck, it is a combo deck. What are you looking to do with this Prime Speaker Vanifar?
Yeah, so this is a combo deck. It just doesn't win, but they'll typically throw down next turn when they realize they can't beat you. So you start with your Elvish Mystic, you sack it to your Prime Speaker Vanifar. You find a Corridor Monitor. That untaps your Prime Speaker Vanifar. Prime Speaker Vanifar sacks Corridor Monitor. That's a 2. You find a 3. You find a Renegade Rallier. It brings back your Corridor Monitor, untaps Prime Speaker Vanifar again. You sack it. You find your second Renegade Rallier. You bring back your Corridor Monitor. You untap Prime Speaker again. You sack it again. You get a... I gotta check my notes here. You get a...
See, even you don't know. That's how complicated this combo is.
You get Bounding Krasis. It untaps your Vanifar again, and then you sacrifice any of your 3-drops in play, and you get a Shalai, Voice of Plenty, which is kind of a key card in this deck.
And then everything's protected.
Yeah, and so once you have a Spark Double and a Shalai, all your creatures are untargetable, and you're untargetable as well. So there are multiple times the Burn player just had to throw down. They can't target you with Burn. If they play that 2/1 wizard that does 3 damage to a player, it has to actually hit them. It must target. And then you often use your Fiend Artisan to just find like a Selfless Spirit. So not all your creatures are indestructible. And then,
oh my goodness, indestructible hexproof.
Then once they pass that turn, you sack the Selfless Spirit on your turn to your Prime Speaker. You get the one of main deck Lurrus, and it buys back the Selfless Spirit.
Gosh.
So you're just kind of like an Anaconda. You're just like your coils are slowly... Like over the course of 2 turns, your opponent can't beat you. Your entire board is indestructible. You're untargetable, and all your creatures are untargetable.
See, now I know. Now I see why you chose to have Umori as your companion, because your deck simply would not function without having 36 creatures in your deck, or 37, because of all the pieces that you need to make this work. To basically make your entire team hexproof, indestructible. I guess. I mean, that's going to make it difficult for most people to win. But man. That is a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I mean, it all sounds great in theory, but how many times did you pull this off?
This happens all the time. Lurrus decks just actually can't compete with you. It's really hard for them to kill Prime Speaker Vanifar. Even if they bring in their enchantment removal, if they're the Chain of the Rocks, you have Knight of the Autumn to tutor up, and then you also have Fiend Artisan to tutor up your Knight of the Autumn, which I've done. And once you just have 1 turn uncontested, your board is just way too big for them to beat. I had a sweet win against Inverter. They played Inverter on turn 4. I tutored up a Deputy of Detention, exiled their Inverter, then sacked it again to put the Inverter back into play. So now they have no library. And then they died on their draw step. So it's one of those where it's like, oh, how can I win? I don't have a way to interact with Jace or whatever. It's just like, oh, it's in the deck somewhere. You got to just like stare at your list, and it's just a sweet line. It's a sweet way to win a game.
Yeah, that is always the most satisfying way to beat a Dimir Inverter player, which is, Jace activation on the stack or whatever, bounce the Jace, and they're just like, yeah, you got me. You got me, I'm dead.
Oh man, this list looks so cool. I'm definitely gonna go give this a go and see if I can pull off what you have pulled off, because it can't be hard,
Take
right?
notes. You need a notebook.
I do.
Or
Yes.
hopefully, hopefully we had like some graphic with like 17 arrows to show what happened, because I'm still trying to put the pieces together right now.
It goes from this very threatening board state where it feels like you can't win to all their creatures are gone and you've got like 15 power in play and they can't target anything.
Oh, thank you very much, David. This list looks like an absolute blast. Paul, I didn't even think. I just saw this and I was like, oh, it's creature soup. I didn't even think about all those combinations, but like, wait a minute, now it'll make sense. It's kind of like the light bulb moments.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is kind of what I expected to see once you started kind of going into the older formats, right? Outside of standard, once you have access to more creatures, I thought that there was going to be some kind of creature toolbox deck. And yeah, I mean, what about a deck with all creatures, right? And once you can kind of go down that path, all of a sudden you have access to basically, what looks like quite a resilient deck. It reminds me of, the older birthing pod decks or maybe some green-white creature toolbox decks, minus the combo, but in the sense that it's really resilient. So when you do play against decks that are trying to 1-for-1 you or have a bunch of spot removal, this deck will actually just match up very well against those strategies. So I think in a metagame where people are just trying to play fair, I think this deck actually just has a pretty good shot of just, competing with those decks.
Well, the deck lists today have been super impressive. They've outdone themselves. I can't wait to see what Modern has for us. So without further ado, Damon, tell us about your take on your Umori Titan Toolbox deck. How did this one do?
Yeah, so like Dan, I started off with some research, and Fiend Artisan is a card that pulls you in just many different directions. Quickly realized that, okay, so I'm sorry in advance, but basically if you're trying to ramp into a good creature, well, what are some of the best creatures that Magic's ever seen? Grave Titan is an all-star in Cube. Inferno Titan's amazing, but actually, Primeval Titan just does all those roles in one, and as well as finding toolbox lands like Bajuka Bog or Ghost Quarter or Blast Zone all day long. So I brought another Primeval Titan deck to the table. It's just kind of the best thing to tutor up. I can only apologize so much for this shape of Modern.
When you were talking about, this card that you thought was the most powerful of all time or up there, I thought you were going to talk about Arboreal Grazer, because I have seen it in nearly every single one of your lists. So I just thought you were going to be going on and on about it. It plays defense. It's a good role player. It does everything. You can sacrifice it. I mean, you can probably just go on and on. So I mean, I didn't think you would just say Primeval Titan, because everybody knows about that one. I mean, come on, but let's be real here. The true all-star here is Arboreal Grazer, right?
It's true. The card does everything you want in that slot. It happily ramps you and then is a willing body to serve your Fiend Artisan's evil or fiendish purposes.
Well, speaking of Fiend Artisan, what is its role in this list? We've seen in the previous two lists, it was kind of like an all-star in Dan's list. It was more of a, I'm going to help you do silly things and just vomit creatures down the battlefield. In David's list, now, what is it doing in yours?
Yeah, it plays a pretty flexible role. So I would say like the main thing it serves is that normally a Primeval Titan deck, Amulet Titan runs a bunch of Summoner's Packs to find the prime times. We want to play Umori, and of course, I mean, Summoner's Pact is straight out, and so we have Fiend Artisan, and it fits in this kind of mid-range toolbox role. It can sometimes beat down. I don't think it beats down quite as well as a build like Dan's does. It takes a while to grow. Your opponents typically are packing cards like Nihil Spellbomb main deck or Cling to Dust or all sorts of things that steadily shrink the Fiend Artisan, and this deck isn't really built to grow it that fast. But there were games where sometimes the best thing to do is, Fiend Artisan, find another Fiend Artisan, find another Fiend Artisan. All of a sudden you have like 3 7/7s, and your opponent kind of dies.
Yeah, but I mean, I imagine a lot of the times you probably went and searched out the Primeval Titan, right? I mean, looking at this, you do have the Fiend Artisan, but ultimately, I mean, with all the ramp that you have, I mean, this kind of looks to be one of the all-stars in this deck.
Yeah, it really does serve a good role in this sense. Like, unlike Summoner's Pact, like you play Pact on the kind of the big turn, your opponent is, counting your mana when you're playing a primetime deck. They're like, this is their turn. Fiend Artisan slips through the cracks. You can just land it, and all of a sudden they, some decks have tons of removal for it, but some decks actually, it sits there. And it actually helps a lot in some of these weird matchups that a green-white deck would have trouble with. So, for example, I can find you like a Thalia or even an Aven Mind Sense or a Gaddock Teague, which are good against these Ad Nauseam or Tron decks. Tron still is tough. Green-whites in Modern just need Wasteland to survive against like the really big mana decks. Another
card I wanted to ask you about was Dryad of the Elysian Grove. You got 4 of them in the deck. What's What's its purpose in this list?
Yeah, so this card is just kind of best friends with Primeval Titan. It just makes the Valakut kill happen basically for free. Just time resolves and just everything dies. It just all blows up. Meanwhile, sits there being this 2/4. It kind of stabilizes the ground, buys you some time. That said, I would want to cut the numbers in this deck. It doesn't quite have the number of bounce lands that Amulet Titan decks have to really support 4 of it.
Mhm.
I would have draws where like I would have 3 lands, like a Dryad of the Eden Grove and a few other cards, and be like, all right, I need to draw some more lands here. I just draw another Dryad, another Dryad, another Dryad, and be like, well, they kind of get worse in multiples. But the whole point of Fiend Artisan is that you actually have a pretty like a reusable tutor to find them.
Yeah, so you could cut a few out and still, have ways to get it with the Fiend Artisan, just sacrifice one of your other creatures, and then,
Exactly.
what would you put in its place? Like, any thoughts off the top of your head?
The green-white toolbox is tricky. I actually might move an Aven Mind Sensor main. That card is first off just hilarious. Have you ever seen a Scape Shift player resolve a Scape Shift with an Aven Mind Sensor out?
Yeah, you don't get a lot of permanence in play.
You do not.
So I have a question, actually. Looking through your list, it being an Umori deck, it does look significantly different than David's list in the sense that it seems like you have maybe slightly less fanciness going on in terms of kind of maybe getting some a chain going or some kind of enough toolboxy effects. Did you cut a lot of them, or did you really just try to have your Fiend Artisans just be multiple copies of Primeval Titans and just focus your entire strategy around that?
Yeah, much more the latter, to be honest. You can try to go for all these kind of creature toolbox chain combos. Modern just has a ton of cheap removal that interacts quite well against them. Primeval Titan is just really the endgame you want. And also, it just, the best card in these green decks to give you a good matchup against Luris. It just goes so over the top of what they're doing. It doesn't really matter how you've managed to stabilize it by turn 4 or whatever. If you land a prime time, the game's usually yours.
Okay, so the big question, though, because you didn't actually tell us your record, I don't think.
Oh, yes. How did it do?
How did you do with this deck? You danced around it.
I went 3-2 across 2 leagues.
Okay, not bad.
It's respectable.
Yeah, the losses were to ad nauseum. They killed me on turn 4. Fiend Artisan was a little bit too slow doing its tutoring job. One game I managed to actually get a pretty good lockdown state with all the hate bears. Meanwhile, the Zirda decks just get Primeval Titan faster than maybe even the Amulet Titan decks do. And so this deck, when it comes to a Primeval Titan drag race, typically comes out in second place, which is last place.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Damon. Very well done. Paul, 3 very different and very cool decks this week. I like them a lot.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, just the fact that they all had success with this card, right? I mean, Dan going 8-4, should have gone 9-3, and then David also picking up a bunch of 3-2s means that this is a real card. This is a card that you can put in competitive decks and have it put in some good work. So again, big props. Sometimes we have decks that are maybe a little questionable, but this time around, I think they did a really great job.
Yeah, they ran with it. Fiend Artisan really pulled its weight in these lists. It wasn't just chucked in as an afterthought or anything like that. So kudos to the Faithless Brewing guys. Now I would like to know from you, dear audience, which deck was your favorite? Standard, Pioneer, or Modern? Let us know down in the comments below. And before we say goodbye for this week, we've got to let the boys know what their card is for next week. Are you ready? Dan, Damon, Dave? Can I get a drum roll, please? Thank you. Vivian, Monsters Advocate. What do you think about that?
I
love Vivian Monsters Advocate. I've been pushing for us to do something with this card, and I'm really surprised that she hasn't taken off in any format so far, really. So I'm excited to take a crack at her in Standard.
I feel like chicanery happened. This is a card that Dan has been encouraging us to brew around on our podcast for weeks. So if we see you guys with some beautiful exotic fish tanks behind you next week or whatever, it'll just be, we'll all know what happened. A little bit of folding money. Yeah, I'm excited to brew around Vivian. I think she's super powerful. I think both her abilities are incredibly powerful. And anytime you have a tutor effect like that, that also clears the top of your deck to let her use her other ability, it's kind of a super open-ended card. So I'm excited to fool around with it.
Yeah, Vivian has a ton going on. Whether she stacks a pantheon of things you can do at 5 mana and not get left out of the room in Modern is a question we'll have to solve.
I mean, I think this is the type of card that I think is going to potentially have a lot of success in standard. And I think it probably gets progressively worse as you get into the older formats because, as Damon alluded to, you can do really powerful things in modern. This is a 5-mana planeswalker that generates you some value. But I think in standard, I'm really, really excited to see what Dan can come up with for Vivian in standard.
If you want to see what the boys do next week, you're going to have to come back then. So be sure to leave a like, subscribe, hit that bell, make sure you have your notifications on. And from all of us here at Rogue Refinery, we'll see you next week.